Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we're going to take a look at horrific details that have just emerged in court after the hate crime rape of a young Sikh woman a few months ago here in the UK. Details that give a clue as to what was behind the crime that hasn't just shocked the whole community, but bring out some very large, uncomfortable truths about life as a Sikh here in the West. Uncomfortable truths about our Western society and how Sikhs are now seemingly paying the price of other minorities' evils. And on a more positive note, we'll watch a young Sikh boy in New Jersey speaking for the global diaspora as he addresses Sikh Awareness and Appreciation Month. And we have some important diary dates for the Khalistan movement to keep an eye out for, and get your Khalistan flag ironed and ready to fly proudly out there. All this and more on today's show. And of course, at the end of the show, we'll take a look at loads of great comments which have been filling up beneath the videos as always. So thank you to my wonderful audience for that. Right, okay, let's start. This is, you will recall this awful story last October. A Sikh lady was raped, and it was seen immediately as a hate crime. It was immediately labelled as a deliberate hate crime. It was a horrendous attack. And I'm just going to read, this is a report in one of the local newspapers, Birmingham Live. It occurred just outside Birmingham in the Midlands here in the UK. And I'm going to just read to you some of the details that came out of this because, as I said in the intro, there's some very, very uncomfortable truths that come out of here and some very specific elements that have appeared, that have emerged in court, which point to a much, much bigger story, and a story that is very relevant to everything that we talk about here on Perspectives. So the details as they emerged, I'll just sort of paraphrase a few of the things that came out in this article. The reporter was actually in court and recorded, obviously, what was said. A Sikh woman was raped by a stranger in her own home, it turns out, because he thought she was a Muslim. John Ashby is the accused. He barged into this woman's home in Walsall after following her off a bus and assessing how he could get inside her property. Ashby was arrested in a place called Perry Bar, it's just in the Midlands, days later, and told police he was booked as he was booked into custody. You never see any Englishmen in Perry Bar anymore. So when police showed Ashby a photo of the woman during the interview, he asked, why wasn't she wearing a hijab? So, of the Crown's case that the alleged offence was religiously aggravated, prosecutor Phil Bradley, KC, said it was his hostility towards her, believing she was a Muslim and calling her a Muslim, I won't use the word, before assaulting her. Ashby, the accused, of no fixed abode, which basically means he's essentially homeless, denies rape, intentional strangulation, robbery of jewellery, mobile phone, religiously aggravated assault, occasioning actual body harm on October the 25th last year. So basically, he followed her home on the bus. The defendant barged his way in to the woman's house, and once inside, and I've got some pretty awful details, and I won't, in fact, a lot of details came out in this article, which I'm not going to repeat, because they are pretty horrendous, I have to say, about the actual attack. But he turned the lights off. He told her, quote, he was here to have fun. Throughout the attack, he racially and religiously abused her. He is said to have called the woman an effing Muslim something, and again, I won't repeat the actual language, and told her she was dirty. He told the woman to say hallelujah as he poured hot water over her, repeatedly telling her he was the master, a big master, and she was an effing something or other. And this language is important, it's horrible, but I'm deliberately replaying this language because it's very relevant to what I'm going to talk about. He is then said to have raped her, but then said he wasn't finished. He repeated that he was here to have fun and to give her some British something or other, a big white British something or other. Again, I'm not going to use the words. He told her his name was John. She needed to repeat his mantra, which was that he was the master, she was the... begins with B. Following the examination, his DNA was found on the woman. It was found on a vape and a toothbrush inside the woman's home because he wanted to brush his teeth. The woman also identified this guy Ashby during an identification parade. He was then arrested 2 days later, and when he was shown a photograph of this lady in the interview, he said, why isn't she wearing a hijab? So I've deliberately, I'm sorry, apologies for the horrible details that have come out, but they are all relevant because, as I said in the intro, they point to a much bigger story here, more than just a horrendous sexual attack on a poor innocent Sikh lady. It's the elements of that attack that actually are really important to bring out because they, as I say, they point to some very, very important aspects of what happened in this terrible case. Because what you've heard, it wasn't just a random opportunistic crime. It is basically the story of, to use big words, a civilizational assault. It is an assault on a whole people, essentially, symbolically speaking. So this guy Ashby, when he stood in the dock, the details revealed a mindset that should actually, and does, I have to say, send a bit of a shiver through all of us, and particularly should through every Sikh household in this country. And actually not just this country, but across the diaspora as well, because a lot of these points reflect the same attitudes across the diaspora countries as well, from a certain section of society. It's not just about sexual violence. This case, this attack was a lot more than that, it turns out. It was about a twisted sense of British reclamation. And again, another key point, a lethal case of mistaken identity. Yeah, you see, we've been here before, haven't we? As I say, this crime, this awful attack encapsulates so many important different elements that we talk about regularly. So I want to look at one particular part that he used. He used this term master slave, the language that he used. He demanded that the victim repeat a mantra that he was the master, she was a bee. I think you can probably fill in the gap. A slave, essentially, a dirty slave. He talked about giving her British part of his anatomy. Now, this is the language of a man who sees himself not just as a sexual predator, but as an occupier, as a superior person. It's, to use a sort of sexual reference, BDSM. It's a BDSM-tinged fantasy, but of something bigger, of racial superiority, this master-slave sort of thing, that this mantra he brought in. It wasn't just about sex. It was more about power, superiority, racist superiority. That is the psychology behind this. And again, this is why it's important to look at the language he used, because it is representative of a certain mindset that we need to understand. He wasn't attacking the person that he thought he was either. This is the other element that we need to bring up. He was spewing anti-Muslim vitriol, anti-Muslim hate, shouting hallelujah, pouring hot water on this poor girl, demanding to know why she wasn't wearing a hijab. So you can see, it's another case of mistaken identity. To this guy, Ashby, the nuance of faith, Sikh, Muslim, 500-year history of Sikhism, it meant nothing to him. He doesn't understand it. This guy is so mind-warped by his blind far-right hatred, and clearly he's obviously not right in the head anyway to commit a crime like this, that he sees just a brown skin as somebody, it's just one of them, isn't it? So it's a target. So again, as I said, this whole crime has so many elements of it that are so symbolic of bigger issues that we have to deal with on a daily basis. We had, of course, this other attack. This wasn't just a one-off attack, this awful rape I've just reported on. There was, of course, a month earlier in Walsall, again in the West Midlands. It was in September, the month earlier. A British-born Sikh woman in her 20s was targeted in Albury, that's not that far away, walking to work at 8:30 in the morning. She was ambushed by two men who said to her, whilst as they raped her, "You don't belong in this country, get out." I mean, again, horrific. But two separate racially aggravated rapes of Sikh women in the same region within weeks of each other. But in both cases, the perpetrators used the language of belonging and Britishness to justify their horrendous crimes. But this, sadly, is the reality of present-day Britain. Our women are being followed off buses, hunted on the way to work. They're being targeted by men who claim to be protecting British values. but then acting like the absolute very savages they claim to despise. So who actually are the savages here? They're certainly not British in my opinion, but anyway. But more importantly, they're being targeted. These victims are being targeted because they're being seen, understood to be, or perceived to be Muslims by people too ignorant to know the difference. And frankly, too hateful, too filled with hate to care. And sadly, we're seeing a trend where the Sikh community is becoming, and I've talked about this a lot in the past, the Sikh community is becoming and has become the collateral damage of a rising, uneducated, anti-immigrant fervour. And I want to talk about in the next bit, it's not just a British problem. As I said, this is reflective. All the elements in this horrendous case are reflected right across the diaspora. You remember, we talked recently about the FBI report. Basically, the West Midlands in the UK is not unique, sadly. The data proves otherwise. In fact, what we're seeing in the Midlands, Walsall, Albury, these places here in the UK, it's the sharp end of a much bigger picture. In the United States, as I said, the FBI, the United States is often a sort of bellwether. It sort of leads the way in many ways for Western social trends. And sadly, it seems to be leading the trend in hate crime, rising hate crime against Sikhs. The numbers are not just concerning, as I reported before, they're absolutely catastrophic. The FBI data, and you remember this graph, which I talked about in detail about a week or two ago when it first came out, it revealed a staggering 3,700% increase in anti-Sikh hate crime since 2015. So in 2015, the FBI recorded just 6 incidents, but by 2025, 228. Now, obviously, as I talked in detail about the time, a lot of that is to do with the fact that there is now a better reporting procedure, but it still doesn't actually hide the truth that there has been a general trend in rising hate crime against Sikhs. Now, this stands in contrast in the US, where overall hate crimes dropped by 11% last year, contrasting to anti-Sikh hate crime, which continued to climb. So, Sikhs are now the officially 3rd most targeted religious group in America, only trailing behind the Jewish and Muslim communities. Why? Well, because in the eyes of a radicalised, uneducated bigot, some right-wing idiot, brown skin is just brown skin, isn't it? They're all them. They're monolithic. They are all the same, aren't they? They don't see the nuances, the differences between a Muslim and a Sikh. They never even heard of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji or whatever. All they see is a visual other that just fits their narrative of an invader. And they're being fed sadly, by populist politicians and inflammatory social media. And sadly, ironically, also the huge rise in immigration, which has fueled this problem, this uncontrolled immigration, which has pushed ordinary, decent people from the middle into further out to these polarised right-wing elements to say, look, we've had enough. And they're looking for targets to blame. And sadly, this awful, one element of that case that came out, key element, was that she was mistaken for a Muslim. And this mistaken identity is a story, sadly, that just keeps being repeated over and over. It's not new. It's been weaponised like never before. Remember, Balbir Singh Sodhi. There we go. This poor guy, Balbir Singh Sodhi. He was the first person murdered in a retaliatory hate crime after 9/11. He was just an innocent Sikh guy planting flowers outside his local gas station in Arizona. And his killer, a guy called Frank Rock, told police that he, quote, wanted to shoot some Muslims and go out in a blaze of glory for his country because he was so incensed after 9/11. He found this poor guy, Balbir Singh Sodhi, at a gas station and just shot him in cold blood because he thought he was a Muslim. So 25 years later, the faces of the killers have changed, but the lethal ignorance is still the same. Nothing's changed. Whether it was 2001 Arizona or 2025 in Walsall, the Sikh community, sadly, tragically, is now serving as this collateral damage for a war that they had nothing to do with. And let's look at all the sort of the cross references here. Recent studies, for example, from North America, particularly Canada, the US, have shown that Sikh women who wear head coverings, dastars, or even traditional Indian dupettas, they report experiencing hate at a rate of 97%. Basically, nearly every Sikh woman in North America has experienced a hate crime of some description. Even those who don't wear visible coverings face higher rates of abuse than Sikh men. It's females that are being targeted because they're more vulnerable. So the John Ashbys, this guy who's being charged with this rape here in the Midlands. So these guys like John Ashby around the world, they're not just racist, they are cowardly because they're targeting women because they see them as the vulnerable entry point, let's call it, to a community that they want to target, they want to intimidate, they want to attack. Women are the easy targets. They're using the hijab, or the lack of one, as a sort of test for their violence. They aren't defending British values. This is nothing about defending British values. They're not obviously protecting women. All they're doing is they're indulging in some sort of weird, fetishized racial superiority. They see themselves as somehow superior. And the basis of that attack is basically to try and erase their targets, erase who Sikhs are, or Muslims are, whoever the target of their horrendous crimes are. So the reality is clear. Sadly, we are living in a time, in an era of Sikhophobia by proxy, not direct. These crimes are not being directed at who Sikhs are, specifically who they are. It's Sikhophobia by proxy. Essentially, Sikhs are being attacked for who people think they are, not who actually they really are, ironically, and I'll talk about this in a moment. And the real insult, encapsulating all of this, is that while Sikhs are being targeted for these awful crimes, the state that we live in, particularly here in the UK, refuses to even give Sikh suffering its own name. Now, there's a clue there because, yes, we've talked about Islamophobia before. And this, again, is related, ironically, to this overall case. Now, we've talked about the violence. We've seen it globally, the surge in anti-Sikh hate crime. But we need, as a result of this, let's look at the response. Because the data's now there. The data is proving that Sikhs are being targeted, specifically. And ironically, as I said earlier, not because they're Sikhs, but because, for whatever reason, Sikhs are just finding themselves as collateral damage. Let's look at the response, for example, from the British state. Sikh women are being hunted, clearly, in places like the West Midlands. But the political establishment is actually, its mind is elsewhere. Yeah, I talked about this story a lot. This is the legal definition of Islamophobia. The Labour government, under Starmer, Keir Starmer, has moved to formally adopt the all-party parliamentary group definition of something called Islamophobia. This definition labels Islamophobia as a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness. Now, it's brought in as a powerful tool that brings with it resources, funding, money, and even its own, they call it the Tsar. There's been a guy appointed as the Islamophobia Tsar, who's there, specifically brought in to oversee the implementation of basically anti-Islam hate. Great. But where's the definition for Sikhophobia? Why is there no government-backed recognition of the specific targeted hate that Sikhs face? But instead, the British state's response is always, you're already covered by the Equality Act. Really? Okay. So the irony, once again, is absolutely deafening. A Sikh woman is raped because she's mistaken for a Muslim. And yet the legal protection she's supposed to benefit from is tailored for the group she isn't part of. You understand that irony? So the Sikhs, again, are the collateral damage of the state's obsession with one specific community, while Sikhs' unique identity is just treated as a footnote, as something less important. So again, as I said, it's just the irony that supposedly any attack against a Sikh is, that's covered under the Equality Act. But no, not attacks against Muslims. They need their own definition. They need their own whole raft of legislation. And it raises very, very big questions about just what is going on in this country. And it does actually bring us to a point of extreme frustration for the Sikh community, particularly here in the UK. For years, it was Sikh organisations like Sikh Youth UK, Shir Punjab, etc., who were the real whistleblowers on the grooming gang scandal. I've talked a lot about that in the past. It was Sikhs who were on the front lines exposing these grooming gangs, these Islamic grooming gangs, exposing the Core to Khan project, basically the sort of almost forced conversions or seductions of Sikh girls into Islamism, so that basically can be groomed and raped. And of course, the systematic exploitation of young Sikh girls, which now is young English white girls, young, ironically, even Muslim girls, basically young girls of all persuasions, but it was Sikh girls who were targeted first. And what was the British state's response then? Well, they called Khalistanis and Sikhs extremists, terrorists, whatever. They tried to shut down activists in the Sikh community to protect community relations. Yes, Starmer himself, our own Prime Minister, during his time as Director of Public Prosecutions, when he was responsible to tackle this specific crime, he presided over a system that victims say was more interested in avoiding racial tensions than in actually prosecuting those behind these awful things. And again, the irony is pretty bitter here. Sikhs were the vanguard of protecting our children from radical Islamist elements when the state was too cowardly to do anything about it. Yet today, because of that same state's failure to control these elements, Sikhs are now being targeted by far-right thugs who think that Sikhs are the problem. Again, you can see why people are so angry and upset about what is actually going on here. And there is a growing and justified suspicion in, I was going to say the Sikh community, but it's not just the Sikh community. Amongst all our communities here in the UK, there is a deep suspicion about what's going on, particularly in relation to our Islamic community. And again, just to highlight the fact, I'm not anti-Muslim, quite the opposite. But there is something wrong. Something is going wrong in British society. Because the British state is providing preferential treatment to the Islamic community, whether it's funding for faith schools, resources for reporting hate crimes, or just the sheer political capital spent on Muslim outreach, or the attempts to try and avoid racial tensions by never speaking ill of the Muslim Islamic community. The Sikh community, despite its massive contribution to British society, is consistently told to wait its turn. Don't worry about your hate crimes. You're covered under the Equality Act. You don't need your own specific one, do you? But again, Sikhs are not asking for special treatment. All Sikhs want is equality, parity with other religions. Basically, Sikhs want the state to acknowledge that perceived Muslimness is actually a threat to Sikhs that requires a Sikh-specific solution. So if Islam's got its own definitions, etc., then Sikhs need that too. They don't just need this umbrella protection of the Equality Act. Because as has been highlighted in that rape case and lots of other different cases, Sikhs are targeted because they are perceived often in these hate crimes as Muslims. So there needs to be some recognition of that, legally speaking. Why isn't there? And why is there this inequality in how our minorities here in the UK are treated? So, how do we move forward with all this? Well, you know the facts. I've run through everything that's happened, all the elements that, as I said, that rape case, that original rape case has spawned all these elements that are so relevant to the bigger picture. As I said, that rape case has been very symbolic because it has spawned a discussion about all these other key elements that were all encapsulated in that one case. But we've seen a toxic mix of far-right ignorance, but we've also seen British state indifference. And all that mixed together has created a real perfect storm for Sikh women here in the UK, because they're now vulnerable from all sides. So the question is, what can we do about it? Do we wait for another rape to happen? Do we wait for the next lunatic to attack another Sikh woman? And I think in reality, the time for passive awareness campaigns is over. We need to be a little bit more robust about this. And interestingly, immediately springs to mind is one of our commenters, Panjab, who comments, we need to be more aggressive in how we fight. And specifically, I think Panjab was talking more specifically about Indian oppression, etc. But this is equally relevant to this situation here in the UK. We need the Sikh community and its supporters like myself need to be more robust, need to be more aggressive, need to push harder to highlight these issues. Firstly, we've got to demand parity. We've got to demand equality for the Sikh community. If Islam is getting this sort of treatment, why isn't the Sikh community? If the government can adopt a non-statutory definition of anti-Muslim hostility to protect those perceived as Muslims, they've got, therefore, to do the same. Stop being hypocritical. So this all-party parliamentary group in Parliament, the MPs who got together to represent British Sikhs, they already proposed, apparently, a definition of Sikhophobia about 6 years ago, in 2020. And it covers incidents motivated by hostility against Sikhs or those perceived to be Sikh. So the British state, needs to stop hiding behind this General Equality Act and acknowledge that the Sikh community faces a specific, unique threat. Without a formal definition, the police will just carry on misclassifying crimes against Sikhs. So if a Sikh woman is raped by a man shouting anti-Muslim hate speech, that is a Sikhophobic crime by proxy. Remember what I said earlier, Sikhophobia by proxy. And that needs to be recorded as such, so the resources can then be allocated to deal with that. Remember, I always talk about it's important to collect the data because the policymakers can't do anything about it. They can't make policy to deal with it unless they know that the crime, the problem, is a fact. So once we know and we can identify Sikhophobic by proxy attacks, in other words, where Sikh women or even Sikh men are targeted because people thought they were Muslims, that needs to be recorded as such so that policy can be brought in, resources brought in, to deal with those specific types of crimes. We also have realised we can't rely on the British Home Office to do its job properly. I mean, it's failed on so many elements. It was Yvette Cooper, who's now a Foreign Secretary, wasn't she once in charge of the Home Office? And that would say a lot. But anyway, the Home Office quite often doesn't get its numbers right. We know they don't. And this is why initiatives like Sikh Guard are absolutely essential. These organisations, which of course have been initiated by the Sikh community itself, of course, as always, because as always it's had to step up in the absence of state ability. Sikh Guard, amongst others, are absolutely essential to bring things forward. It's a platform designed by Sikh officers and community leaders to make sure that crimes are recorded correctly. So, as I said earlier, it's absolutely imperative that crimes are recorded, that the data is generated, because the policymakers cannot be told you need to make a policy about this unless they have the data to work with. So the solution, therefore, for the Sikh community, particularly here in the UK, and it applies equally actually across the diaspora, isn't just to complain, it's to flood the system with the truth. Flood the system with facts, data, the truth, what is actually happening. Every time that a Sikh girl is harassed on a bus, every time a Sikh man's turban, his dastar, is knocked off or targeted, it's got to be reported through Sikh-specific channels like Sikh Guard. Report it, for heaven's sake. we need to build this data, this wall of data, so that the government has no option but to do something about it. Because frankly, the government's too lazy and incompetent to build it themselves. So it is, once again, beholden on the Sikh community to do it for themselves. And then finally, and this is an element that even some of our commenters have talked a lot about in the past, is that the Sikh community has to be more self-reliant. And it is, as evidenced by many of the initiatives I've talked about in the past. Historically, the Sikh community has never waited for, rulers, whether it's a king or a state or whatever, to protect its own. It's always stood up for itself. And in the West Midlands, for example, the area where these terrible rapes occurred, we've seen all sorts of groups organised together to provide a presence where the state has basically retreated. So it is groups like Sikh Youth UK, Shir Punjab, Sikh Guard, whatever it is, Sikh Federation. I mean, there's hundreds of these wonderful organisations brought together by the community that have had to do that in that vacuum created by the state, because they've been failed by the state. So basically, the Sikh community needs to strengthen all its internal networks. It needs to coordinate and work together. I mean, it could literally be across the board. Self-defence classes in Gurdwaras, buddy systems for international students, for example, women travelling at night, carrying the rape alarms as issued by Sikh Youth UK, whatever. But it's all a coordinated effort. It's vigilantism, basically. Savour, in many words. If the state won't protect the Sikhs because they're too busy managing community relations or too busy not wanting to upset the Muslim community, it's up to the Sikh community to do what it always has done, and that is to stand up for itself, stand as a shield for the vulnerable. So to bring it full circle back to John Ashby, the accused in that horrible rape, he was attacking what he perceived to be a slave. He didn't realise he was attacking a whole community. A community that is far stronger and ironically far more British than he is, I have to say. So, yeah, shocking. As I said, that case, horrific as it was, actually has been very symbolic in all the elements that have emerged from the courtroom. The things that this guy, John Ashby, said, it does actually highlight all the bigger issues that we need to tackle on a much bigger scale. So let's move on to something a little bit happier, a little bit more positive. I want to talk about something that offers actually a bit more of a positive blueprint for the future. Now, we often talk about, and I have talked a lot about in the past, about awareness, and particularly these proclamations. These proclamations where state bodies, particularly in the US, are invited, are proposed and are persuaded to make wonderful public proclamations in support of communities, particularly the Sikh community. And this has been a really positive, really successful initiative by the Sikh community, particularly across the US. And these they can be described as a little bit of an abstract political tool, but they are more than that. They're very visible, and they do actually have a big impact. And I'm going to play a little video, which is a lovely little video which I came across. It's in New Jersey, in the States, and it demonstrates exactly what these sorts of moments mean to the people who lead our community. This is East Brunswick Township Council. This is a meeting that took place about a week ago. The council officially proclaimed April this year as Sikh Awareness and Appreciation Month. Wonderful. I mean, a great victory for the community to get that. But the most powerful moment in that sort of meeting didn't come from any of the bigwigs there, the mayor or the council members. It actually came from a young lad, a young Sikh student named Karman Singh. I want to play you this video. His little speech, bless him, this little lad, he stood up, brave as a lion, and delivered this wonderful little monologue to the council. Let me play this for you.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Good evening, Mayor Cohen and the town council members, and of course you as well. My name is Karman Singh Gill, and I am a student here in East Brunswick. I wanted to come up here tonight to personally thank you for approving the proclamation recognizing April as Sikh Awareness and Appreciation Month in our township. I've been coming here and speaking since I was only 6 years old. Seeing our local government officially recognize the Sikh community really means a lot to students like me. It's more than just a piece of paper. It's a sign that our neighbors see us, value our history, and appreciate the values we try to live by. When you see your own culture and identity celebrated by your town leaders, it encourages us to keep giving back to the community that supports us.
Bless him. I mean, it was, it's just such a sweet little boy giving a really powerful, ironically, a really powerful speech. He stood before those officials and shared actually something quite profound. He'd said, he's been coming to these meetings to speak since he was only 6 years old, a wee lad, a child, growing up, but with his local government, advocating for his identity since the age of 6. And his words were they were really powerful words because they were a direct answer to anyone who thinks that these proclamations are just sort of symbolic fluff or whatever. He said, and to quote, "It's more than just a piece of paper. It's a sign that our neighbours see us, value our history, and appreciate the values we try to live by, like savour and equality." And he spoke about the reality of being a teenager today, of trying to figure out where you fit in. He explained when a young Sikh sees their culture celebrated by their own town leaders, it then creates a sense of belonging that obviously then encourages them to give back even more to the community. Recognition leads to belonging. Belonging therefore leads on to a stronger, safer society for all of us, not just the Sikh community. So again, it comes back to the importance of raising the Sikh profile. Because again, to contrast that horrible story I've just talked about, where those lunatics, the right-wing lunatics, thrive on this idea that Sikhs are somehow strangers or invaders, whatever, they're relying on the fact that Sikhs are unseen, are misunderstood. That's the sort of the mix that they really play on, that they leverage to create hatred. But so when you get events like this, township councils, however small or whatever scale that they're at, representatives, big representatives from the state legislature are there hearing. They're recognising the Sikh community. They're effectively de-strangerising. So again, when these lunatics are trying to say, well, look, the strangers, the invaders, these events are now actually validating Sikhs in the community. They're telling the public, all the people, the public who are watching these things, that the Sikhs that live amongst them aren't invaders, they're not just other people. They are a vital part of the tapestry that is their own local society, their own local town. So, and bless her, that's his mother standing next to him. I mean, she must be so proud. It'd be great to see, actually. There were all sorts, as I say, lots of important people there. But the narrative that really needs to be pushed in all these sorts of things is that Sikhs aren't just integrated. It's more than that. Sikhs are an asset. And again, it's a fact that I bring out regularly, is that Sikhs aren't just a community within our society. It is how much they contribute. They are actually a positive contributing asset into our society, whether it's here in the UK, North America, Australia, wherever Sikhs land in the diaspora. They don't just sit there and suck on the teat of that state that they arrive in. They get off the backsides and they build, they create, they build businesses, they contribute to their local communities, their local commerce, whatever. So these awareness months are important because they're not just there to make us all feel very good about ourselves. They're there for the public to understand what the Sikh presence in their neighbourhood is. It's a guarantee of service to their community and it's a guarantee of safety. And again, that's an important point. How often do we hear the phrase, if you're in trouble, if you're a woman in trouble, go find a Sikh, he will protect you. You know, I see that so regularly on social media, that comment or words to that effect. Sikhs represent safety. So yeah, when I see that young lad, it's, as I say, this young lad, however old he is now, it's a very positive thing to see. And these positive things are things that we need to focus on. Because, of course, the older generation have to fight the legal and political battles, the dirty war against Hindutva, the dirty war against oppression from all sides where it's coming from. It's this younger generation growing up, that they need to grow up with the confidence that they do belong in our societies, that they are appreciated by the rest of society for what they do. So as I say, don't dismiss these local meetings as a little bit of just visual fluff or whatever. They're important. They do actually have a huge impact. They do mean an awful lot. So again, well done to that young lad. As I say, it was a very, very moving speech that he gave. So okay, let's wrap up. And a final thing, just a few diary notes. We've got a lot of things coming up over the next couple of months, and for the Khalistan movement, some very big things happening. 3rd of May, here in the UK, Smethwick, just at the Gurdwara to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Declaration of Khalistan, yes, in 1986, at the Sarbat Khalsa. I talked at great length about the Sarbat Khalsa and all the wonderful positive sort of coordination to say, right, this is it, we have to have Khalistan. So to celebrate all that, there is a bit of a gathering at the Gurdwara in Smethwick, the Guru Nanak Gurdwara Smethwick, on the Sunday the 3rd of May. So if you're there, if you're in the region, please get along there. Go join the Sangat. Go join the ceremony. There will be a flag raising of the wonderful Khalistan flag. So be there, be proud. Bring your own flags as well. Fantastic to build the crowd there. Likewise, a little bit further afield, anybody in Brussels, if you're in Belgium, there is another one. And this is the Khalistan Day Freedom Rally, actually on the 29th of April. Again, commemorating that great Sarbat Khalsa, the Declaration of Khalistan. This is, as I say, on the 29th of April. The Sikh Federation obviously pushing this one. Sikhs will gather once again at the Akal Takht to mark the historic 40th anniversary of that Sarbat Khalsa. And the massive gathering of over 500,000 Sikhs in 1986 was a historic show of force. It was a show of defiance and, of course, as always, a measured response to the Indian government and all its barbaric atrocities that it committed. So a document will be released apparently on the 40th anniversary across the world, outlining the future strategy of the Khalistan struggle. So that's important to keep an eye on that. There is apparently an official document that is hopefully going to combine all the stuff that we talk about, all the plans, the strategies. We talk about constitutions, well, the institutions we need to get in place, etc., etc. Huge administrative job just to launch a sovereign nation. But anyway, there is apparently a document that will be released on the 29th of April to cover in that. It will be released in Punjab. Notice Punjab, not Punjab. Regular viewers will know the significance of that. But it will also be released at a press conference in Brussels at the Brussels Press Club on Wednesday the 29th. So again, if you're around, if you're in Belgium, get across to there. Keep an eye out for that. And then finally here in London, 7th of June, the annual gathering, the annual remembrance of the terrible events of 1984. It's labelled the March and Freedom Rally. I guess it'll be around Trafalgar Square. Details will be issued in due course. But yeah, 7th of June, there will be a mass rally. I think on the big anniversary, the 40th anniversary, 2024. I think nearly 30,000 Sikhs gathered in Trafalgar Square. Many people, many speakers. Dabinderjit Singh of Sikh Federation gave a great speech at that very rally. So I guess it'll be much of the same. So again, if you're in central London early June, get along to that. Bring your Khalistan flag, most importantly of all. Bring your Khalistan flags. Keep it happy, keep it peaceful. As I always reiterate with all these events, please, 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 don't be provoked. If there's any counter-protesters or whatever there, anybody there just trying to provoke you, ignore them, smile at them, treat them with indifference. Better still, treat them in a more amicable manner. But whatever you do, never ever gift propaganda to Hindutva. Keep it peaceful. Don't get violent in any way, shape or form, please. Okay, let's move on to our comments column. Thank you, as always, to you guys for all your efforts and all your contributions. Always magnificently received, wonderfully received. I did a really fascinating podcast, I would say, one of my favourite podcasts I did with Dr. Graywell last week. And Dr. Graywell gave a really interesting presentation about what is a nation, what is a state, what is a nation state, what is Khalistan, what boxes would it need to tick to justify its existence as a nation, as a state. as a new sovereign Sikh state. Of course, you guys who watched it, and I do urge you, if you haven't seen it, go watch it, because in fact, I think the slideshow that Dr. Growell did and talked about was so powerful that I think, given time in future, I'm just going to borrow parts of his presentation and probably do whole stories about it again, because there was so much packed into that presentation, so much important facts, figures, philosophies, concepts, justifications, pick your word of choice. But there was so much important information in that podcast that it deserves actually greater airtime and greater focus on it. But anyway, yeah, many of you were equally impressed. Ajit Pal Sandhu says, impressive analysis of our sovereignty. Good job. It was indeed. Dr. Grell did a fantastic job on this. Singh Dalursha, it was an incredible philosophical explanation. I love seeing such efforts, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you for that. And yeah, absolutely. I think the sentiment across all the viewers was pretty much the same. Dr. Grell did a fantastic job. Hardal Singh comes in, thanks us both for an eye-opener. It should be in Punjabi. Yes, indeed. Actually, I wish we could translate it, because, yeah, again, it was such a powerful presentation. It needs to be translated in Punjabi so we can spread it further, get it into Punjab itself, and get the people in Punjab. So if you're in Punjab, if you're in India, please get people, link them to this podcast, get them to watch it, again, because it's a really powerful piece. Stay safe. Yes, thank you for your lovely comment. I understood what's going on. I do my best. The questions were right on point. I hope they were. But interestingly, YJB came in. India and Indian 80% Hindus are actually a proxy of the Middle East. And one day they'll destroy Israel. Innocent Israel will never know about Indian roots with the Ottoman Empire against the Jewish. Now, there's a bit of backwards and forwards about this. And in fact, YJB has actually made a few other comments along similar lines. I put this comment up because I thought, what on earth is this all about? Firstly, I didn't really understand the point being made. And secondly, the implication that there is some link between India and Indian Hindus and the Middle East against Israel. And this, of course, sits in context with the relationship between Israel and Narendra Modi's BJP, and how they've sort of joined together, as indicated by the Epstein files, interestingly. This sort of tie-up between these right-wing extremists, the Zionists in Israel, the right-wing extremist Hindutva forces in India, and likewise extremists in America on the MAGA front. But this contradicts that. And I have to say, I did a little bit of digging on this. When I read this comment, I thought, and there is actually something interesting in this. And in fact, so much so, I might actually do a whole piece next week, given time. I might allocate a whole piece to discuss what I uncovered on this. And it is actually remarkably interesting, the stuff I uncovered. So thank you, YJB, for your comments. And because my immediate reaction, it's one for Critics Corner. No, it's not. Absolutely not. It's a very interesting, very valid perspective, I think is the right word. And I want to talk about that maybe next week in a show under a separate article. And YJB popped back again to say India is an unstable peacock. I think that's a great description. It is a peacock. It likes to display its feathers. It likes to display itself. Look how magnificent we are as a country. As a Hindu country, essentially, is really how it displays itself. But the key word there is unstable. Yeah, it is. Those feathers could suddenly just start falling apart. As indeed, the subject of the show yesterday was all about the inevitable breakup of India. It is unstable, as I highlighted in that show. Hello, Amrik. Amrik pops back in. Hello again, Amrik. Thank you. This almost went into Flatterer's Corner. You are a great orator. Thank you very much for that. Much appreciated. Yes, indeed. Yeah, I wield my words as weapons against the death throes of Hindutva India. Absolutely. But as you rightly point out, it is inevitable. It is going to disintegrate. I was going to say sadly. No, not sadly. It is. It has to happen, I think, for the benefit of India and Indians and the separate parts. As you say, Amrik, Modi and his regime will be labelled as the Gorbachev of Hindutva India. Actually, I don't think so, because actually, I disagree on this, only because Gorbachev is actually seen as a bit of a benign character. He presided over the breakup, essentially, of the Soviet Union. He was one of the instigators, essentially, of the eventual breakup of the Soviet Union. And as a result of that, Gorbachev has actually been seen in quite a benign light in the West. Modi, I don't think, is ever seen as benign in the West. Quite the opposite, certainly amongst most of us. So I think that's the only part that I will disagree with on that. But then you bring up, of course, the subject of Bishnoi. Yeah, he is basically. He's just another proxy for the research and analysis wing. He is a tool used by RAW, operating from his Gujarati prison cell. He couldn't do his operations without, obviously, the oversight, the acquiescence, the allowance of the Indian state to let him get on and do that, etc. So yeah, he is basically pushing the Hindutva regime's agenda across the world. Hello, Timbuktu. This was an interesting, short conversation. The subcontinent is economically in every way better if it's organised like Europe and the European Union. Now, that's an interesting comment because actually when I did a podcast with Gunther Fehlinger, an Austrian politician, maybe a couple of years ago, his big premise about Khalistan, and we talked about Khalistan, but he also predicted that India will break up. He is in absolutely no doubt that India will break up. And his suggestion was that India should actually be reorganised into a federal mechanism, much like the European Union, because the European Union arguably, operates functionally reasonably well as separate federated states. I disagree with that. I'm not actually pro-EU, I have to say, just to put my own, hoist my own colours up the mast. But ultimately, the EU, and certainly in Gunther Fehlinger's perspective, was a very successful coordinated federation of separate individual states. And he suggested that India should actually be broken up and then reformed as something similar to the EU. Now, actually, Dr. Xi Jinping says, and I have to agree with this, is that European Union is dead. I'd say North America. In other words, don't model yourself on the European Union because the European Union, economically speaking, is dying. And I have to say it is. If you look through the propaganda, ignore the pro-EU propaganda with which we are bombarded with on a daily basis, certainly here in the UK and certainly, I've no doubt, across Europe, is that how wonderful and how successful the EU is. It's not. It is an absolute economic basket case, which is why actually I predicted the EU will break up in the future. But anyway, no sign of it happening immediately. But ultimately, the EU is not a model to be followed. Certainly politically it shouldn't be, because all the EU done is actually remove democracy, ironically, and replaced it with something a little bit more authoritarian. That's why I'm not such a supporter of the EU. I see the EU as just another authoritarian state that has conveniently removed democracy from its own governance model. So I agree with you, Dr. Xi Jinping. I think the EU is not the right model, but North America, the United States, is actually the model to follow. I think that is a very valid comparison, that India should be reformed in some form of United States of India. But ultimately, where Khalistan is an independent sovereign state, so it's a bit more of a hybrid version, where each state does still have its sovereignty, does have its own autonomy, its control over its own affairs, but ultimately combined, they all work together to push the whole subcontinent forward to a greater success. But then, as you popped in a little bit later to add, look, India is on its last legs, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right on that one, with a little leg emoji, the last leg emoji, I like that. Amrit Saravar. Oh yes, thank you for this comment. Yes, I did mention in that piece I talked about, the breaking up of India. One of the drivers of why the southern states like Karnataka, like Tamil Nadu, Kerala, etc., are so unhappy with the current situation, the status quo, where they're unhappy and they're threatening to break away, is because they say, look, we are the economic generators of India. We generate so much commercial success. We are the engine that is contributing so much money into India's coffers, into our money, our tax revenue is poured into New Delhi. And where does it go? It doesn't come back to us. It goes to Bihar or Uttar Pradesh. Because, as I said, and I gave some facts and figures, for every rupee, for example, that Karnataka contributes to Delhi, they only get something like 25% or 30% back on that. I think it's a little bit more than that, between 20 and 40%. So in other words, they're getting less than half back of what they're contributing. But Uttar Pradesh gets something like 7 times more than it contributes. For every rupee it contributes, it gets 7 back. So you can see the disharmony, the unbalanced economy of India there, which is why potentially it's going to break up. What I didn't mention, as Amrit points out, is what's happening in Punjab. Yeah, I did actually look this up. Thank you for highlighting this. Punjab doesn't get anything back, only pay. Actually, we're all about facts and truth. The truth is, it does actually get something back. Do you know how much it gets back? 17%. So basically, for every 100 rupees that Punjab contributes to Delhi, it gets 17 back. So 100 given, it only gets 17 back. So you can understand why Punjabis get a little bit unhappy about things. It's why I can sit here and say validly, truthfully, that Punjab is a neglected state. It is deliberately neglected by New Delhi because they want to destroy Punjab, despite the fact it should be as commercially successful as Karnataka, as Tamil Nadu, etc. But it can't be because it's being deliberately held back by Delhi. Watch many of my podcasts to find the proof of that, the evidence of that, how it's been deliberately denuded, dissolved of its industry, its commercial base, how it's being infiltrated with drugs to try and destroy the state, etc. So the facts speak for themselves. You're absolutely right. So thank you, Amrit, for that comment. And as I said, the proof is in the numbers. And then I was actually I thought, you know what, I'm going to have a new page. We've got Critics Corner. I'm going to call it Flatterers Corner because I do get some really nice flattering comments from many of you, and I couldn't resist indulging in one of them. Newsreader is awesome. Thank you so much. It's not very often I ever get called awesome, usually in a negative manner, but I'll take that. Thank you, Apna Convoy, for your lovely comment. That was really nice. But the ones that followed actually are probably a little bit more relevant in terms of why I sit here. Kamal Prit Singh says, you're a trustworthy person. Very good. You are very good at your speeches. Yeah, the key word there is trustworthy because it's all about the truth. As Singh Dalursha says, as always, it's good to see some news that is actually true. Yes, indeed. This is really why I sit here. This is why hopefully I receive complimentary comments from you guys, is because I do try where I can as much as possible not to bring you propaganda, but to bring you the truth. Admittedly, there is a bias, there is a prejudice in how I deliver the news because we're all fighting a goal to establish Khalistan. So of course, the way I present the news is obviously to put a positive spin on anything that supports the whole concept of Khalistan. But that is different to what India does, the Gaudiya media, which basically misrepresents everything, lies to you. Let's be blunt about it. So what I try to do is bring you the truth. I might spin it in a certain way, but ultimately the facts are the facts, the truth is the truth. That is why I sit here. That is why I deliver what I deliver, and in the way I deliver is I try to bring you the truth, to try and counteract that tsunami, that huge wave of misrepresentative mistruths coming from India that tries to totally twist the narrative, take control of a narrative and twist it into a pro-Hindutva, pro-RSS, pro-Modi propaganda. It's just nonsense. Anyway, so as I say, yeah, I'm here just to try and bring you the truth, guys. So, but as I say, I can only do it with you guys. I need your help, and I always do appreciate you guys contributing as you do on a regular basis and sending me all the interesting information that I can then do some digging to get that truth out to you. As I say, there's only little old me here, and I need you guys out there as my roving reporters who are out there in the field, on the ground, picking up these interesting stories. So do keep them coming. And of course, the final words of the show do go to Darshan Singh Bra. Hello, Darshan Singh Bra. Khalistan Zindabad. Khalistan Zindabad. Absolutely. That is what we're here for. That is why we continue to do what we do, knowing that golden horizon, the golden sunrise of Khalistan is just peeping above the horizon. We're nearly there. We don't know specifically when it's coming, but we know it is coming because all the signs are there. The movement is building, the momentum's growing, the weight is there. As we say, the Khalistan Express is thundering down the tracks, or the Khalistan sunrise is appearing at the horizon. Great to see. But that's it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. Interesting couple of podcasts coming up Thursday, Friday. So actually this is in fact the last perspectives of this week, because tomorrow, Thursday, I will be doing a podcast with Dr. Sandhu, an interesting one. And then Friday, a podcast with Dr. Grewal. So do keep an eye out for those two podcasts coming up over Thursday and Friday. But as I say, that is it for Perspectives this week. So Perspectives will be back next Monday. So thank you for all your contributions. Do keep them coming. Do email me at message@satellitetv.com if there's anything you'd like to bring to my attention, or just pop something in the comments below. But all your contributions are appreciated, even if it's just a good morning or a Khalistan Zindabad, or even just an emoji, a Sat Sri Akal emoji. They all count. They're all nice to see. It gives me that warm, fuzzy feeling. Anyway, that's it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. As I say, all being well, see you tomorrow.